Chapter 230. The darkness that suddenly descended within Frost River reality was like a curtain that covered one's face. Theoretically speaking, ability users with extraordinary powers and special forces equipped with exoskeleton armor would not be affected by the darkness. However, an atmosphere filled with malice and murderous intent followed the arrival of the darkness. Feelings and such were fabricated. They floated in the air, but the restless negative psychic pressure was real. The group of people from the society did not know the range of the darkness for now. However, they could personally feel the urgency and impatience within the darkness. The more it was like this, the more they needed to be steady. Under He Yuan's deployment, Luo Nan was surrounded by the special forces armed with guns and shields. He advanced sideways, but his speed was not fast. Maintaining the formation was his #1 priority. Ghost Thunder and the other Ablatum Knights advanced with all their might. The distance between the two sides rapidly closed. Every Ablatum Knight was equivalent to AC+ rank awakened. They were infinitely close to the architect level. Overall, they followed the consistent logic of the order and cultivated strictly. The power they possessed was more focused, direct, and tyrannical than ability users with outstanding personalities. Moreover, there was a natural tacit understanding between them. When the 4 Ablatum Knights turned their attention to the Society's team at the same time, their malice intertwined with each other and blended with the darkness. It was like an incorporeal and brutal evil beast that roared soundlessly. At this moment, the format pyramid on the bodies of Xue Weiluan, his father, and the special forces shook at the same time. They were like candlelight in the wind, nearly extinguished. All of the attacks followed the flow of energy and information. Several firecrackers exploded on Luo Nan's mental plane. The attacks on the mental plane disturbed the structure of his body and soul. Luo Nan's feet were a bit messed up. Then Cat Eyes and Xue Lei grabbed his arms one after the other. They supported him as he moved. Cat Eyes did not say a word. Xue Lei whispered, "Nanster, are you okay?" Luo Nan shook his head. The enemy's response was very decisive. They immediately changed directions and advanced. They coordinated with the power outage and used the darkness to launch a powerful attack. It was filled with the feeling of planning. The faintly discernible feeling of discomfort that had been present ever since he left the luxurious room appeared once more. But this time the feeling of indescribable inexplicable had lessened. The constellations circling within his mental senses were clearly revealing something. Luo Nan used a brand new perspective to analyze this dark and subtle hidden information. The most fundamental purpose of drawing the life sketches was to come up with a new explanation of the world in a dimension that was most suitable for him. He wanted to establish an axis and establish rules. Because of this, when Luo Nan drew these life sketches and pieced them together to form a marvelous starry sky, large amounts of chaotic information no longer rushed at him like a swarm of bees. Instead, they revolved around each constellation, interacting with each other. Only after a buffering and combing process was Luo Nan able to selectively extract the information. Such a model was also very crude. Compared to the feedback he received when his soul left his body in an out-of-body state, it was even more inferior. Many meaningful details would certainly be left out, and there would be a lot of redundancy at the same time. But in the end, it was an effective method of explanation, and it was most suited to Luo Nan's reality. It didn't matter what sort of secret methods the other party used. As long as they were effective against Luo Nan would be able to sense them. Naturally, there would be a new explanation for them on this star atlas. They would be incorporated into Luo Nan's rules, making it convenient for him to finally trace the source and lock onto the target. Originally, the information was very vague, but as the 4 Ablatum Knights advanced like a hurricane, Luo Nan's mind was filled with warning bells, and he was able to see things more clearly. In his eyes, the darkness was the background of the profound void. Dozens of constellations and hundreds of thousands of stars were circling back and forth. Now they were rapidly approaching and clashing with each other, bringing an unprecedented brilliance to the star map that had been relatively still. It formed an interesting contrast with the restless negative spiritual pressure on the plane of reality. Everyone's life sketches were different. They appeared in the form of constellations. Some were simple, some were complex, some were clear, and some were blurry. Zhang Yingying and Cat Eyes were simple and clear. He already had a relatively deep understanding of them in the past. He Yuan and Bai Xinyan were powerful, and their configurations were exquisite. With his current level of analysis, there were naturally more areas that were vague and ambiguous. As for the 4 Ablatum Knights represented by Ghost Thunder, they were strong and had deep enmity towards him. It was even more difficult for them to draw it clearly. Within Luo Nan's mental senses, the 4 knights, one in front and the other 3 at the back, were like 4 balls of nebula dust that had exploded in deep space. They came pouncing over. The collision on the star map level was a bit faster than the collision on the plane of reality. And when the 2 sides of the blurry chaos collided, the nodes and lines that were originally not very clear were purged of the dense fog. They suddenly became much clearer. As the star map changed, He Yueyin, who was protecting the flank, issued an order, "White salt, cover." Just as her voice fell, the ceiling above the pitch-black sky exploded with a rumble. The decorative planks shattered in the explosion, turning into shrapnel that splashed in all directions. The special police officers were well trained. The shield-bearers raised their shields at the same time, blocking the space above them. Clanging sounds rang out for a time. There were even a few popping sounds of explosions mixed in with the subtle cracking sounds of the shield structure being damaged. The explosion-proof shields could block the inner ring, but they were useless against He Yueyin, Bai Xinyan and Zhang Yingying, who were roaming around the outer ring. Zhang Yingying was fine. She took 2 quick steps to the front and evaded it. The remaining 2 were within the range of the explosive shrapnel, and their reactions were completely different. Bai Xinyan's movement speed did not change at all. It was just that a cold wave suddenly rose from her body, sweeping through the air. Any shrapnel or explosive lightning was instantly frozen. Even the corresponding kinetic energy was stripped away. They rustled like snow falling to the ground. Such an unscientific spectacle nearly made the eyes of the special police officers pop out of their sockets. Only now did they understand the meaning behind He Yueyin's so-called cover. As for He Yueyin, she did not retreat when the cold wave flooded the darkness. Instead she advanced. Her figure could still be seen with her first step. Her second step was blurred and distorted. By the time she took her third step, her figure had completely disappeared. Only a brilliant arc of light sliced through the darkness. And the arc of light was already 30 meters away. Right now, the average distance between the 4 Ablatum Knights and the team was only around 40 meters. Right now, He Yueyin had clearly killed her way to the front of the enemy's pouncing formation. If she was even the slightest bit sluggish, there would be a fatal risk of being attacked from all sides by the enemy. But the arc of light was far too fast. They didn't have the time to truly worry about anything. The brilliant arc of light suddenly flashed and extinguished. Practically no sound could be heard as the arc of light flickered and extinguished. But a certain constellation immediately fell apart in Luo Nan's perception on the star atlas. It dimmed and disappeared. It was only at this time that the people with the sharpest ears were barely able to hear the sound of blood splattering within the dark air. Shuelei drew a cold breath to the side. A kill in 10 steps. Cat Eye's voice was hoarse within the encrypted channel. Ghost Thunder killed confirmed. The channel was a sheet of silence until He Yueyin issued a new order. 12 o'clock direction. Accelerate. Following the order, Zhang Yingying, who was in front, did not utter a word. She turned around and sped up. And at the edge of the darkness where the team met, He Yueyin's figure appeared. She continued to protect the flank as if nothing had happened before. If there was any change, it would be that she shot a glance toward the center of the formation. Her target was not Luo Nan but Shuelei, who had just lost his voice. Chapter 231. Luo Nan paid no attention to the minute changes around him. His entire mind was focused on the changes in the star atlas. The instant He Yueyin killed Ghost Thunder with a single slash, she also cut open the layer of hazy nebula dust surrounding Ghost Thunder. Before Ghost Thunder died, his constellation finally appeared clearly. Even though it soon dimmed and disappeared, the internal structure of the constellation was still a good reference for Luo Nan to analyze the other Ablatum Knights of the same order. In the blink of an eye, Luo Nan's star atlas became much clearer. Correspondingly, the obscure and unclear external force that was exerted from the void became harder to hide. Luo Nan could see from the star atlas that the force was secretly interacting with the assault formation of the 4 Ablatum Knights. However, Ghost Thunder, who was at the front, was killed with a single slash. The force which was still being deployed was thrown into chaos. It struggled a few times before it finally scattered. Oh crap. Luo Nan began to worry for the other side. The force was actually quite considerable, but it leaned towards the mental plane. In order to be effective on the material plane, one needed to find a more suitable entry point for interference. Therefore it had not been able to truly move down. It just circulated and spiraled, accumulating power in preparation for a thunderous strike. In terms of judgment, awareness and techniques for accumulating power, He Yuan was 1,000 times more professional than Huang Bingzhen, who had been shoved into a corner. However, the other side clearly had bad luck. It was not easy for them to have the opportunity to interfere through the use of the 4 Ablatum Knights. However, He Yuan's frighteningly powerful slash had struck their weak spot. They had probably already suffered a backlash, causing the accumulated power to collapse and scatter in all directions. It was not a big deal for this considerable power to scatter, but it was a disruption to the overall situation of Frost River reality. The special police officers around Luo Nan were clearly wearing thermostatic exoskeleton armors, but they were shivering. They were affected by the corrosion of this scattered power. But soon the nearly extinguished format pyramid on everyone's chests lit up once more. It was repaired and perfected, cleanly expelling this inexplicable chill. Your reaction is quite fast this time. Bai Xinyan gave a light praise in the channel. She took the opportunity to ask, your body is fine, right? Is there a time limit to the blessing of the Shield of Truth? It should be fine. Luo Nan responded casually. Most of his mind was still focused on the Star Atlas. The timely addition of the format pyramid's augmentation wasn't due to his fast reaction. Instead, it was because he was trying his best to maintain the star chart that he had drawn with great difficulty. Why was Luo Nan worried for the enemy? It was all because the effects of the energy dissipation were too annoying. In the next few seconds, Frost River reality was a scene of chaos. The trapped citizens were already terrified and restless in the darkness. They were swept by this power that was brimming with negative psychic waves. Their mental defenses were about to collapse. For a time, screams and wails rang out in Area A. Even when the gunmen went on a killing spree, it was not as miserable as this. If the hearts of the people became unstable, the life sketches would also be affected. Luo Nan had been mulling over whether or not he should give a boost to everyone within the range of his senses, but it was too late in the end. Stabilizing the souls of almost 100 people and sorting out their auras in the midst of the rampaging negative spiritual waves was beyond his ability. In the end, the star map couldn't help but shake violently. Luo Nan felt that all the stars were trembling. There were many phenomena of displacement. The structures that had appeared before were all deforming. This destroyed nearly half of Luo Nan's efforts. Damn it! Luo Nan could not help but curse. What's going on over there? Shuelei's gaze glanced at He Yuan a few times. In the end, he could not help but ask in a low voice. Right now, his ears were filled with screams and wails. He could not stand this atmosphere. He would rather have a few powerful enemies jump out and fight with his life on the line. But at this time, the Ablatum Knights were intimidated by He Yuan's ghost-like blade techniques and the collapse of the augmentation behind them. They hesitated to move forward, and the team advanced incomparably smoothly. Luo Nan shook his head, temporarily dispelling the vexation in his mind. He sent a message in the encrypted channel, comforting Shuelei and reporting the situation of his observations. It's nothing for now. It's just that someone is up to no good, but Secretary He's caused a backlash. His power has gone out of control. He can't cause any substantial damage. There were no more than 3 people in the entire team who could truly understand Luo Nan's words. However, no one doubted Luo Nan's words anymore after his successive highlights. Instead, they were affected by his train of thought. Most of them guessed and pondered. And at this time, Cat Eyes reported, "My range of perception has been affected. Right now it has a radius of 38 meters. Mr. Luo?" He Yuan immediately looked for Luo Nan to confirm. Luo Nan did a rough scan. Though the star atlas had yet to dissipate, the range of his perception was not greatly affected. The positions of every Ablatum Knight were within his grasp. He immediately said, "My side is fine." Zhang Yingying jumped out. "How much is fine? 80 meters?" The number Luo Nan reported was the same as before. In fact, The radius of his perception on the life plane had already broken through 120 meters. And it was still expanding at a pace that was neither too fast nor too slow. Oh, hold on. Did I make a mistake? Luo Nan's train of thought suddenly deviated while Zhang Yingying was still sighing with emotion. How strange. The more I look at you, the more I feel that your all-encompassing perception is abnormal. Why are you always able to see things that others can't? Is it because of the psychic's abilities mixed in? The level is very high. The perspective is different. Cat Eyes gave Luo Nan a rare positive evaluation from the side. And this was the result of her constant observation. The direction of application is different. Bai Xinyan joined in the discussion. Cat's long-range perception is closely coordinated with her body technique. Student Luo Nan seems to be more focused on pure observation. Of course, it's easier for him to be disconnected. Yes, the direction is different. Luo Nan suddenly responded. Cat Eyes needs to make a timely response to all changes within the range of her perception. Every detail needs to be clear. And I don't need to consider other problems. I just need to make a choice between precision, range, and level according to the observation requirements. It's fine. There was no way to continue this discussion. Zhang Yingying looked up at the sky and rolled her eyes. This is the strangest thing. So it turns out that your family's mental senses can be adjusted at will? You make it so that the tens of thousands of ability users who have cultivated painstakingly, pondered carefully, and finally found the most suitable soul frequency with great difficulty. Just like this, the millions upon millions of ability users who have fixed the direction of mental enhancement, how do they feel? The discussion in the encrypted channel came to a screeching halt. Luo Nan didn't know that he had instantly ended a topic. Right now his heart was filled with relief and joy. Sure enough, communication was the best way to solve problems. If it weren't for this, he would still be madly sprinting in the wrong direction. It's too thin. It's too narrow. When he drew his life sketch, there was a problem with the direction of his focus. Just like when drawing, the most taboo was to dig into the details and highlight the parts. Right now, he was unable to project his limited mind into those inexhaustible deep layers of configurations. Even though the star atlas was chaotic and endlessly turbulent, not a single one of the Ablatum Knights or the trapped civilians could escape his clairvoyance. In the end, that obscure and unknown power was locked onto by his observation. This wasn't because he had dug into the sketches in great detail. Instead, it was because he had grasped the overall composition of the area of perception. He could observe its general outline and know its direction. It was enough. He didn't dig into the details. He looked at the overall situation. He was able to observe the entire domain of interference between the mental and material planes. He was able to observe the entire plane of life. Chapter 232. In order to understand the whole, one must first see. Simply see. Luo Nan's previous clairvoyance mode could not break away from the pattern of the old explanation. He had to honestly expand his domain step by step. He had to consider the body's ability to endure and process enormous amounts of information. But after changing to a new explanation, it was still a sketch to begin with. It was a general impression of the whole. It was a recreation of one's feelings and memories. One only needed to grasp one or two characteristics of life dynamics and use simple brushwork to synthesize them. This was the difference between sketching and sketching. It was the difference between meticulous brushwork and freehand brushwork. Luo Nan summarized life sketches into sketches and configurations. Sketches should be the first. This was the core of the whole train of thought. It was the true direction of application. Before the composition of the whole was confirmed, no matter how real the details were, they could be distorted and absurd when viewed as a whole. Just like the chaotic star atlas outside his body right now. The whole. Luo Nan emphasized to himself in a hypnotic manner. He closed his eyes, opened them and then closed them again. Through this method he forgot all of his old-fashioned modes of observation. He let his thoughts and consciousness expand outwards, to higher heights, to further places and to wider places. At this moment, the range of his clairvoyance was like a contracting and expanding heart. It was like the rising and falling tide. Contracting, expanding, rising, falling. The frequency of the conversion grew faster and faster. The range of conversion grew larger and larger. Suddenly, some indescribable limit was broken. It was like a great river bursting its banks, overflowing in all directions. It was like an iron mold shattering. There was no longer any fixed pattern. There was an instant when Luonan felt that his body and soul were about to scatter into the void. Only when the dark chains trembled and the power of the My Heart's a Prison format appeared did Luonan retract. It was also in this instant that the range of Luonan's mental senses recovered to the peak value of his out-of-body state. It reached 800 meters. In a few breaths of time, the radius exceeded a kilometer and it was still expanding. The entire Frost River reality, including the 3 buildings that supported the amusement park, and even some of the surrounding areas were all within the range of his clairvoyance. Blurry constellations appeared one after another. Everyone within Frost River reality was not limited to the people by Luonan's side. This included Fairchild, Bays, the 7 Ablatum Knights and nearly 100 trapped citizens. Then there were the people outside of Frost River reality. There were even the police officers on the 3 bearing buildings. There were tens of thousands of spectators. There were stars as bright as diamonds in the constellation system. There were also shadows that were hard to see. There were even dark clouds that were hazy and turbid. The shadows were of inanimate objects. The shadows were of inanimate objects. The shadows were of inanimate objects, and it was difficult to analyze them. Although he didn't try his best to depict it, there was a wonderful connection between motion and stillness, between inanimate objects and life, between the known and the unknown. Light and shadow intertwined. Light and dark corresponded. Illusory and real interacted with each other. Under their interaction, the boundaries between each constellation, shadow, and dark cloud gradually blurred. They intertwined with each other, but their trajectories were clear. The Dharma and logos were in harmony. Finally, they turned into an endless winding galaxy that spread out. Without a doubt, this was the most profound and vast picture Luonan had ever drawn in his entire life. It contained layers and mysteries that were hard to fathom. If it was possible, Luonan really wanted to be intoxicated by it. He wanted to ponder over every detail. But today he would no longer sink into it. He just used an independent, transcendent, wondrous perspective to capture and draw the outline of the structure of this star river. Overall, it was more appropriate to use the word star river to describe this feeling. It was as if Luonan was standing at the center of an enormous galaxy. The starlight was sparse in the area he was in, but 3 enormous and bright spiral arms unfolded in his surroundings. These arms accurately represented the number of living beings in Frost River reality and the 3 buildings. However, there was a hazy dark cloud entrenched at the top of each of the 3 spiral arms. It blocked the starlight. The 3 dark clouds were connected to each other, outlining a turbid domain of darkness. The domain pressed heavily above the star river. There were even many penetrations. It was difficult to see the true appearance of the inside. There was no doubt that the 3 dark clouds were where the secular first ablatums of the Order of Justice were located. Looking at the current situation, Luonan's previous judgment was probably correct. The 3 first ablatums were all here. Yes, the most important target of tonight had been found. The range of Luonan's mental senses continued to expand. Only when the limit of the range exceeded 2 kilometers did the expansion show signs of weakening. The enormous picture of the galaxy had already covered 3 prosperous blocks. The highest point was the high-altitude traffic layer, and the lowest point was the enormous underground drainage system of the city. There were tens of thousands of life sketches that represented living beings, and it was hard to count the number of stars. Of course, from Luonan's perspective, the pure void and inanimate objects were merely meaningless shadowy regions. Unless he was willing to expend a great deal of energy, transform his mode, and deliberately observe with clairvoyance. At this time Luonan felt the pressure once more. The stars affected each other and acted upon each other. In the end, an enormous tension was formed in the depths of the river of stars. It also formed far too much redundant information. In addition, the greater the size, the greater the level of contact and the amount of information received would naturally increase. Even if he didn't actively sense it, the enormous life level of Xia City's metropolitan area was like a myriad of galaxies in the deep sky, shining light over. Luonan pondered for a moment. He took the initiative to reduce the radius of his senses to 1,500 meters. Then he continued to shrink it back. In the end it reached a kilometer or so. It just so happened to include the entirety of Frost River reality and the conjoined skyscrapers within it. Now that it had stabilized, there was enough margin left. The brilliant Milky Way flowed silently, the light of the stars parted and the shadows shifted. Luonan maintained a vague and subtle connection with the faintly unending starlight projection in the distance. As the range of his clairvoyance was determined, the expanding power was retracted. His detailed senses began to become more sensitive, and the interaction between them began to fine-tune. It even spontaneously affected the subtle discordant areas. Luonan didn't need to observe it directly to tear apart many areas of chaos. However, the dark clouds located at the top of the 3 skyscrapers were still thick and stable. It was hard to observe them. Well, at least 2 of them were like this. As for the other one, there was an excessive accumulation, but there was a lack of thickness. Why was it a bit familiar? Luonan had a plan in mind. He temporarily withdrew his mind and naturally reached into his pocket. His mind was free of distractions. He completely forgot that his arms were being held by Shuelei and Cat Eyes. He didn't manage to reach the right spot. His forearm swung down and he swung it far away. He smacked a plump and elastic spot and there was a faint sound. Cat Eyes instantly turned her head to this side. Even though they were in the darkness and the brim of her hat covered them, her eyes still flickered with a cold light. It was so piercing that Luonan couldn't help but squint his eyes. However, the most important thing was to take out the object. Though his hand felt like the fabric of his pants, it wasn't his pocket. Luonan was rubbed twice nearby, but he was unable to pull his arm back. He could only speak to Cat Eyes. "You let go. I'll take the object." At this moment, Luonan seemed to feel Cat Eyes tighten her grip on his arm slightly. But in the end she didn't say anything. She just let go of his hand. Luonan finally reached into his pocket and took out the metal box. He weighed it in his hand. Cat Eyes' hand noiselessly returned to his arm at this time. She continued to support him and she spoke in a husky voice that was rarely heard. "Do you need help?" Luonan looked at Cat Eyes once more. Her eyes were still as bright and cold as before, but there was an unfathomable curve to the corner of her lips that was blurry in the darkness. Her lips hooked up slightly. It was quite contradictory, but there was a novel feeling that Luonan had never felt before. Luonan looked at her, and he had the urge to immediately pick up his brush and draw. Chapter 233. Break it. The cold light in Cat Eye's eyes dimmed. He was a bit suspicious. "You're not going to use it as evidence?" Luonan blinked again, but he had already drafted a script in his mind. He said, "Yes. I suspect that this toy has been tampered with. The enemy has used it to establish a snake nest and lock onto our position." Many people raised their eyebrows as soon as he said this. Luonan's words had violated He Yuan's request. His words had entered the ears of others. But no one was paying attention to this right now. "Is that so?" Zhang Yingying turned her head in curiosity. Think back to the previous time. If the secretary hadn't killed Ghost Thunder with a single slash and affected the enemy's methods, they might have already made their move. At least this is what I feel. Luonan relied on the little bit of credibility he had just established to speak without thinking. In the end his logic was a mess. But now there were people who believed him. Zhang Yingying's eyes went wide. "Then why haven't you thrown it away yet?" "We have to break it first, right? Humph, Fairchild gave this to you. If he comes back and denounces you, will he?" Luonan's astonished expression defeated everything. Zhang Yingying waved her hand. "Forget it. Since you say so, watch me." Her voice had just fallen when a clear sound rang in everyone's ears. It was like the trembling of a wind chime. It was pleasing to the ear and heart. Luonan's hand trembled slightly. He saw this rather thick metal box silently split into 2 halves. A weak electric flame flickered and then disappeared without a trace. The split was right above his thumb and forefinger. A bit of cold air seeped into his skin. It was as if a sharp and invisible blade had cut across his skin. "Hey." Luonan could not help but stare with wide eyes. His body sank a bit. There was absolutely no problem with applying for a severed limb. "No need to thank me." Zhang Yingying beamed and waved her hand. "Still not throwing it away? It should be fine." Luonan was speechless towards Zhang Yingying. He just replied without thinking. But his mind stirred and he added, I don't know who the first to blade him was. Looks like he's pretty average. Ghost Thunder's death completely severed the subsequent changes. Zhang Yingying could not help but roll her eyes. No matter how average he was still a clear oath first to blade him. In terms of strength he was able to crush everyone here except He Yuan and Bai Xinyan. Just as these words reached the tip of his tongue, a flat voice rang out from the side. Of the 3 first abladems of the Order of Justice in Xia City, Qingli is probably the one whose words are truthful. He's the youngest and he relies on his ancestors. His great-uncle is in Wang. Qingli. Just as Zhang Yingying was about to interrupt, He Yuan coldly shot her a glance and pointed at her earlobe. Clearly he was reminding them not to violate his request and chat casually. What a double standard. The boss is the boss. Zhang Yingying sent a thumbs-up emoji in the encrypted channel, her sarcasm overflowing. Luonan was very surprised. He looked stupidly at He Yuan. No one should have understood the purpose of what he had just said, but He Yuan had cooperated seamlessly with him. If that person was really Qingli, then the effect of those 2 sentences would be many times better than his. He Yuan turned her gaze over and gave a slight nod. Luonan did not have the time to think in detail. His mind stirred slightly. He looked at He Yuan, but on the plane of his splendid galaxy form, the dark cloud that he had locked onto long ago surged. It had already lost its steadiness and now it was surging and churning. Although its aura was astonishing, it could not compare to the other 2 majestic and solemn performances. Moreover, this dark cloud was splitting off streams of turbid undercurrents. They rushed in the direction of Frost River reality and seeped down. Luonan already felt a chill while the dark cloud was still circling and accumulating energy. The others' target was this place. Their malice was clear, but they were clearly impatient and angry. The color of their emotions appeared within Luonan's clairvoyance. The matter could not be delayed. Luonan casually tossed away the metal box that had already been cut in half. His mind scattered into the surrounding dark air. The metal box contained the consumables needed to create the human-faced arachnid. It was useless to take it out by itself. It would only dirty his hands. But as long as he had a matching computer and printer, he could form complex and clear written materials. Luonan was probably the best companion in this small area of Xia City. At least from the current situation, the Order of Justice's research on the human-faced arachnid was not any deeper than his. The ink was currently drifting away into nothingness. Other people were unable to sense it, but Luonan's soul strength gathered it noiselessly. He needed it twice, but he still felt a bit awkward. His consciousness sunk into the external neuron and he opened the format pyramid interface. Through this interface he could communicate with the Wraith Sign, who was several dozen kilometers away. He did not need the Wraith Sign to do anything. It just needed to stay there and be a model for him. However, he never expected that the Wraith Sign would be captured through the original format pyramid system. He had just set up the Galaxy Clairvoyance system to receive information from the Wraith Sign. The range of Luonan's clairvoyance could not reach that far, but it was just as he had sensed before. The larger the volume, the richer the information received. The Wraith Sign was not a living being. The depths of its structure were a mass of primal chaos. There was no life sketch to speak of. However, the structure of the primal chaos formed an obscure shadow under the illumination of other starlight and under the pull of the format pyramid system. The shadow was projected over a great distance. The power of a simple projection was too small. It could not be of much use, but it was a very good model. Luonan originally just wanted to follow the structure of the Wraith Sign. He wanted to copy it and make a low-level imitation. But this way he simply threw the consumables into the projection. This way it would be an authorized high imitation, right? It was not that simple to duplicate the human-faced arachnid. Huang Bingzhen followed the methods of the order and collected the so-called consumables. They were merely of the lowest level. The current Wraith Sign was too lazy to even glance at them. No matter how high an imitation was, it was just a likeness. Its functions were simplified and its power was ordinary. But Luonan felt that it was enough. Not long after, a human-faced arachnid that was closer to the original form of the burning wraith floated in the air. In terms of efficiency, the Order's methods were far inferior. Aside from Luonan, no one could see the human-faced arachnid right now. The mental plane was endlessly deep and had many layers of structure. It was like layers upon layers of dark curtains. From the human-faced arachnid, it was the best hiding place. Even cat eyes who specialized in perception, or even He Yuan and Bai Xinyan, would find it hard to reach the deeper regions. But Luo Nan's mental senses were able to probe the deeper regions from the very beginning. He was completely different from other people. Perhaps it was because his mental senses were purely for the sake of observation? Under the control of Luo Nan's consciousness, the low-level human-faced arachnid noiselessly infiltrated the void. Not long after, it followed the spiral arm of the galaxy and arrived at the edge of the surging dark cloud. The light of emotion still flickered within the dark cloud. Luo Nan thought back to last week. When he faced Jack, the Wraith sign had taken out a method that left a deep impression on him. The fellow had transformed into a piece of information, a bit of emotion. It had seeped into Jack's thoughts, pushing forward layer by layer, all the way to the depths of Jack's soul. Clearly, the human-faced arachnid had a similar instinct. Luo Nan did not have high expectations for the low-level version. It was fine as long as it could enter and transmit information. The human-faced arachnid swayed outside the dark cloud. It faced the light of emotion within the dark cloud and charged headfirst into it. Chapter 234. Luo Nan had no way of doing anything after the low-quality imitation human-faced arachnid entered the dark cloud. He could see how it operated on the level of human energy and information, but it was very difficult to operate it. It was the same as throwing a listening device inside. Whether or not it would be effective depended on a bit of luck. Right now, the spiral arm of the dark cloud was smeared with complex emotions. It was like a swaying poisonous mushroom, but it was not completely transparent. Luo Nan felt that it was still lacking a bit. He needed to wait. Luo Nan did not place all his hopes on the human-faced arachnid. His attention returned to Frost River reality. The battle between Fairchild and Baze was not that loud. Luo Nan often forgot about their existence. It was hard to imagine how these two experts who were proficient in body techniques fought. However, when the Galaxy Clairvoyance system was set up, it was impossible for Luo Nan to ignore it even if he wanted to. This was because the brightest cluster of stars was right there. This was a very interesting phenomenon. The most eye-catching constellation in Luo Nan's life sketch was that of Fairchild. Luo Nan wanted to successfully analyze Fairchild's super strength. It was an impossible task. However, Fairchild had revealed to Luo Nan the profundities of the mutual interference between the mental and material planes. Fairchild's body was grand and imposing. There was little concealment, so Fairchild's life sketch was clearly displayed. It was obviously impossible to simplify it to the level of cat eyes. However, its structure was complex and it lit up many stars. As a result, Luo Nan could sense an astonishing brightness and sense of existence amidst the splendid galaxy. It was because of Fairchild that the 8 Ablatum Knights, including Baze, were affected. The nebula dust that covered their bodies would be torn off from time to time, exposing some of the deeper mysteries. Luo Nan pondered. Through this, he could use it as a reference to pry into the Order of Justice's first ablatum. He just needed a bit more time. But at this time He Yuan issued a new order in the encrypted channel. 1 o'clock direction 50 meters. Go through exit number 3. Luo Nan and the others who had been moving forward discovered that they had unknowingly arrived at another exit of Frost River reality. This exit was connected to the bearing building. They could enter Block B of the connected building from here. In other words, they would be able to leave this dangerous area that they had been in for a long time. Zhang Yingying, who was leading the way, couldn't help but say in the channel, "Hey, aren't there still 100 people who can't be saved?" He Yuan replied, "The mission target is the Order's gunmen. Luo Nan already killed them all, okay? There are at least 10 people inside the 3 buildings." From the current intelligence, other than the Officiant and the Ablatum Knights, there were still 3 to 4 groups of people in the Order that were not under control. Yulan Hotel has confirmed that it's the sniper team. There are also operation teams in the 3 surrounding buildings. Zhang Yingying had been curious about this question for a long time. Finally, she couldn't help but ask, what's the point of killing the gunmen? First Ablatums and Ablatum Knights are the real deal. The gunmen will cause more civilian casualties. Hey, you're saying that a secret-bound First Ablatum and 2 clear-sworn First Ablatums are no match for a few gunmen? For now, yes. After a few consecutive questions and answers, Zhang Yingying was very dissatisfied with He Yuan's answers. Just as she was about to put in more effort, the red fox, who had not appeared in the encrypted channel for a long time, suddenly interjected. The direct interference of the mentally enhanced with the material plane is rather limited before becoming an extraordinary. The direct killing power of a mental storm may not be comparable to a metal bullet. And the first ablatum's weapons are currently at Frost River reality. They are under Fairchild's control. This makes it very difficult for the first ablatum's energy to deviate by a large margin. He Yuan continued Red Fox's message. Right now there are at least 30 to 50,000 citizens in the 3 buildings. These people can't take fright. If a stampede were to occur, the consequences would be unthinkable. To accomplish this, the gunmen just need to pull the trigger. And we can't afford to pay this price. Luonan had to admit that He Yuan and Red Fox's words made some sense. However, the two of them had just been bickering with each other and now they were singing the same tune. How could the other people who had their own standpoints endure this? Luonan was a bit embarrassed. Compared to He Yuan and Red Fox's train of thought, his thoughts were a bit too presumptuous. Even if he drew out the life sketches of the 3 first ablatums, it would not be of any substantial help in resolving the current situation. Then should he adjust and search for the gunman? But this would require a large increase in the precision of his senses. Luonan realized that he might not have this ability. While Luonan was thinking about his own conundrum, Zhang Yingying's thoughts were more practical. How long would it take to circle the 3 buildings? He Yuan answered as if it were a matter of course. We are only responsible for building B. The military will be responsible for buildings A and C. The encrypted channel was immediately shocked. Papercut asked, "The military? The military is personally taking action? Oh right, that flying shuttle just now." Zhang Yingying also shouted, "I knew it. How could there be such a coincidence? You were the one who gave the order to prove Ghost Thunder, right? Did you use your personal connections?" He Yuan herself had a solid military background. This was no secret in the society. However, aside from her military accomplishments, she rarely displayed her personal connections during her time in the society. This sudden mention really caught people off guard. He Yuan did not immediately respond to this question. Zhang Yingying would not let her go. "Hey, wouldn't bringing in the military complicate the situation?" Secretary He Yuan was 2 seconds late. Then she said, "It's official cooperation." But He Yuan no longer paid attention to this topic. She directly said, "Enter building B in half a minute. Red Fox, Bamboo Pole and Papercut are still responsible for Yulan. Pay attention. According to the requirements, we need to deal with the gunman within 300 seconds. A countdown interface was added to the encrypted channel at the same time the information was transmitted. Right now there were only 295 seconds left. The sudden addition of elements made everyone stunned. Papercut was faced with this unreasonable mission. He said in astonishment, "We'll need more than this amount of time to run back." Right when he was doubtful, Red Fox turned around and left without a word. Bamboo Pole pulled him and sped up to catch up. It was as if Papercut had just woken up from a dream. He increased the force of his feet, but he still wanted to ask, "It's not even 5 minutes. What if we can't do it?" "We'll implement the emergency plan in 285 seconds. It's impossible to predict what will happen when the time comes. Speed up." He Yuan urged the team to advance quickly. At the same time, she laid out the next steps of the operation. After Special Police Squadron 2 enters Building B, you will be responsible for guiding and maintaining order. Everyone else, with the floor you entered as the boundary, Mr. Luo, Yingying and White Salt will form a team and head down. Cat Eyes and I will form a team and head up. Quickly search and deal with the gunmen. Contact them at any time. After 270 seconds, regardless of whether the mission is completed or not, we will immediately descend from a high altitude and leave the range of the triangular building complex. Every time she mentioned the number of seconds, it was in coordination with the countdown interface. She reminded everyone that the arrangements were constantly consuming time. The group of people were doing their best to digest this information when He Yuan specifically said to Luo Nan, "Mr. Luo, you must focus your energy. Don't get distracted." Luo Nan was stunned when he heard the hidden meaning in her words. But at this time he faintly heard a piece of information. It seemed to be a sigh of regret, but it also seemed to be a mockery. Chapter 235. Luo Nan's mind suddenly slanted. This piece of information that had no head or tail did not originate from any member of the team. It did not seem to be directed at any member of the team either. It just soared through the air and reverberated within his mind. He was stupefied for a moment before realizing that there was progress on the human-faced arachnid's side. He clairvoyantly observed the dark cloud above the spiral arm of the Star River. He could clearly feel that the density of the dark cloud was decreasing. More and more blurry starlight was reflected. There was even some energy information that was deciphered and analyzed through the human-faced arachnid. Those few words did not seem to be the real-time dynamic of a conversation. It was more like the intense obsession of a certain person's heart, causing the relevant information to grow and accelerate endlessly. It looked like the person within the dark cloud was in a bad mood. He raised his head to look up. Through the metal frame and the transparent glass ceiling, he could see the silhouette of the pitch-black and lightless tall building. It was vaguely similar to the dark cloud in his senses. In reality, the group of people were rushing towards a dark cloud. Moreover, it was the target that Luo Nan was targeting. The color of the light was constantly changing, nearly turning into a poisonous mushroom. Or maybe it was a coincidence. Luo Nan's gaze locked onto a corner of the building. He could not see any clues with his naked eye, but he could feel the malice hidden deep within the air on the mental plane. It grew clearer and clearer as he got closer. Even though He Yuan had warned him not to get distracted, what if he was under the interference of a first ablatum? Luo Nan sent a message in the encrypted channel. It seems like we're being watched. It's that fellow who talks too much. He Yuan's reply was filled with the flavor of a matter of course. As long as we're in one of the 3 buildings, we'll certainly be watched by at least one first ablatum. Don't worry. Don't get distracted. This was the second time He Yuan had warned him. Right now Luo Nan's feet were practically not touching the ground. He was being carried by Shuelei and Cat Eyes as they sprinted through the connecting passageway. Shuelei moved close to his ear and said, "You didn't arrange for me just now. You must follow Uncle." He Yuan suddenly asked before Luo Nan could finish speaking, "Has Shuelei already obtained the talisman? I just made small progress in the past 2 days." Shuelei was suddenly stunned. He turned his head to look. "You know?" He Yuan didn't respond. Instead she issued another order in the encrypted channel. "Shuelei and Mr. Luo will be in a team. According to the time limit, regardless of whether the mission is completed or not, you must quickly leave the vicinity of the building." Shuelei didn't say anything, but Xue Weiluan was startled. Just as he was about to speak, a message flashed through the encrypted channel. "Hey Sister Nun, it seems like you're using awakened ones as your criteria. Is this some sort of arrangement by the society?" The one who sent the message was Bai Xinyan, but there was no response from He Yuan. Xue Weiluan's words were blocked by this message. In the face of a completely unknown background, making wild guesses and suspicions was one of the worst things a special police officer could do. It was the same for his father's identity. At this time the group of people had already entered Building B. The special police formation automatically dispersed. Cat Eyes flashed out of the group and stood together with He Yuan. Zhang Yingying pulled Bai Xinyan over. She grabbed Luo Nan and Shuelei. "Do you know why you need to concentrate?" The 2 high school students shook their heads. "What happens next will be very exciting." Zhang Yingying blinked. She was just about to say something when she saw Xue Weiluan walking over. She shut her mouth and walked to the side with Bai Xinyan. Luo Nan also hurriedly stepped aside, giving the father and son some time to talk. However, the conversation between the father and son of the Xue family was much more straightforward than they imagined. The 2 men, who were both equally majestic, hugged each other heavily. Even though there was a thick layer of exoskeleton armor between them, it didn't matter. "Do your best. Be careful." There wasn't much time to talk during the continuous countdown. Before their voices could fade away, the glass wall adjacent to the entrance shattered with a bang. The glass fragments flew down and a gale whistled in. Zhang Yingying looked down. "The slope is okay. It's not the straight up or down type." At that moment Shuelei could feel his father's arms tightening around him. He grinned and broke free. "Don't worry." Zhang Yingying turned her head to look. Shuelei has tried descending from a high building before? Shuelei maintained his confident smile. The gym master taught me the jumping ape technique. I've also practiced a bit of extreme parkour. I've tried it on a high floor but the distance wasn't very long. Excellent. Zhang Yingying gave him a thumbs up. With a burden like Luo Nan white salt and I will definitely have to spend a large amount of energy on him. You need to be careful. It's time for a martial artist to crush a mentally enhanced dregs. Zhang Yingying was halfway through her words when a figure flashed by her side. He Yuan and Cat Eyes practically leaped up shoulder to shoulder. They braved the gale and leaped into the dark void. Their figures flipped and they flew up. They only left a message in the encrypted channel. Hurry up. They didn't have the chance to carefully plan due to the urgency of time. At this time, it depended on whether or not their daily habits were efficient. Right now, the power outage of the building and the elevator were out of service. They wanted to complete the entire journey in less than 4.5 minutes. According to the society's usual practice, they relied on the skills of ability users to play fast ascending and descending. He Yuan didn't choose Luo Nan to go up. This fellow's terrible physical skills were probably one of the important reasons. Zhang Yingying shrugged. She wasn't in a hurry. She knew from the moment He Yuan arranged the mission that the intensity of this group's mission was much easier. The specific plan of action naturally had to be sent to the encrypted channel. Luo Nan's sensing radius is 80 meters. Building B's width is around 150 meters. Just make a spiral around the building. If everything goes smoothly, we only need 100 seconds to set foot on Fudong Main Street. Luo Nan was astonished. That's fast. I won't be able to lock onto the gunman in time. The terrain and angle of the lower floors are meaningless. The possibility of a gunman is too small. The secretary just wants us to retreat. Are you ready? Me and the big guy will go first. Shuelei shuddered. The confident smile on his face was a bit stiff. But no matter what, he couldn't let others, especially his father, see this. It would only cause him to worry. He silently recited the mnemonic that the gym master had personally taught him. Transform the water and fire into a discipline. He began to encourage himself. I'm different from normal people. I'm really different. Qin Xiaolin's face miraculously flashed in his mind. Then it dissipated like a bubble. The yin and yang within his body rose and fell. His body, which had been eroded by the gale within the darkness, recovered its warmth. The little bit of hesitation and absent-mindedness melted away into nothing. Shuelei was even more certain that he was born for this sort of scene. He tilted his head slightly and locked gazes with Luo Nan beside him. This was the friend who had drawn him into this wonderful world. The two punched each other. Let's go. As Shuelei shouted, he leaped into the dark void outside. Zhang Yingying also leaped out of the building at practically the same time as him. Then came Bai Xinyan, who was holding onto Luo Nan's waist with one arm. Xue Weiluan followed closely behind them. He stuck his head out to look and just happened to see his son. His son was more agile than any ape or monkey. His long arms slapped the glass wall a few times to borrow strength. It was as if he was riding a skateboard as he flew all the way down. Several figures quickly disappeared into the curtain of night. Chapter 236. At the center of the rooftop of Building B, a gear-like structure hummed as it revolved. It constructed an intricate and marvelous formation. Rays of light weaved together like a cocoon, wrapping in Qingli within. With this layer of cover, and Qingli could no longer hide his ashen face. He ground his teeth heavily. His thoughts were completely on the building beneath his feet. He was on the damned members of the society who made him feel as if his heart and lungs were on fire. As a sworn first ablatum, he could be considered a mentally enhanced in a certain sense. However, his mental senses were never his forte. He needed to use the divination domain to lock onto a target several hundred meters away, separated by several dozen layers of reinforced concrete. However, as long as his consciousness existed in the divine play domain for a moment, and Wang's evaluation seemed to linger in his mind. How unsightly. And Wang's words were as light and subtle as usual. They were worth pondering. But this time, the most superficial meaning was enough to make Qingli feel as if he had been slapped in the face. His entire face was wooden. He stood within the magic array, but he felt as if he was imprisoned in a cage. the gazes of the surrounding people turned extremely strange. Actually, the priests and members of the order were far from being able to access information from the divination domain. It was very difficult for them to know what the first ablatums were doing and what they were communicating with each other. However, Qingli still felt terrible. He had a feeling that Wang's words had spread far and wide. Correspondingly, his performance as the judge personally appointed by Wang had spread far and wide. This was completely different from what he had imagined. He had never thought that this half-grown child named Luo Nan would be so thorny. Other things aside, Luo Nan's soul strength was extremely thick. Most importantly, it formed its own system. The so-called format pyramid appeared to be illusory and indistinct, but it was like a layer of irritating curtains. It acted as a buffer for penetrating power on the mental plane. Qingli had tried to use his power time and time again, but he wasn't confident that he would succeed in one strike. He could only keep accumulating power. He hesitated for a long time, waiting for the military to activate the ghost bomb with great difficulty. Qingli then took advantage of this opportunity. He used the Ablatum Knight as a carrier to find an opportunity to kill the enemy in one strike. But who would have thought that just as the accumulated power was about to take effect, it was chopped off by that damned secretary. He himself suffered a backlash and his soul was shaken. He still hadn't calmed down. The most damned thing was that Luo Nan and his secretary had mocked him by name after the fact. And this was a one-sided situation where they had guessed correctly about his identity. A great humiliation. If this matter were to spread, then he and Qingli would become an eternal laughingstock in Xia City and even in the Order of Justice. He would never be able to survive. At this moment, Qingli only wanted to avenge his humiliation. The people from the association had already passed through the connecting passageway and entered Building B. Building B was good. He was in Building B. There were 3 connected buildings. The height of the buildings was around 700 meters. They were connected to Frost River reality in the center. Following the arrival of Luo Nan's group, the straight-line distance between the 2 sides had already shrunk to less than 400 meters. The enemy had even divided their forces. A heaven-sent opportunity. Qingli began to mobilize the power of the divination domain. However, just as he started, Wang's thoughts cut in and seized all the authority of the divination domain. The projection of the scales of truth in the center of the Great Triangle forcefully attracted the attention of every officiator. The position of the white scale on the classical pendulum scale was lifted up by a bit, and the black scale correspondingly fell down. It looked like the state of imbalance had been corrected. The winding and rotating posture of the kite on the black scale was more lively than it was at the beginning. This showed that the ritual had made great progress. Qingli was shocked at first when his authority was seized, but his face burned when he saw this scene. It was reasonable to say that Wang had personally appointed him to judge Luo Nan with the ultimate goal of breaking the order that Luo Nan had formed. He wanted to release the elements of pain and chaos and make the scales of truth reach equilibrium. Now that there was great progress, Qingli should be happy. But the problem was how much of this was due to him. Qingli had been affected by the secretary's decapitation, and most of the power he had accumulated had been dissipated. Although he had frightened the citizens of Frost River reality out of their wits, the chaotic elements of the 100 or so people couldn't be considered a weight at all. What truly affected the scales of truth was the panic of the surrounding citizens caused by the power outage of the 3 buildings. And the reason for all this was because Wang had given an order to the action team. He hadn't used any supernatural powers. Qingli felt that Wang was a fool when he compared the 2. However, Wang wasn't too satisfied with the current situation. It's still a bit lacking. Perhaps I've placed too much of a foundation on the scales of truth. I still need to make up for it. Xianxia, who was on the other side of the building, really wanted to ask. Just what was the foundation that Wang had placed? But at this time Qingli, who was anxious to save face, couldn't wait to say, "Leave it to me and Wang. This time I will definitely get rid of those people from the society. You only have one chance, child." And Wang's thoughts were gentle and firm. Only those familiar with him knew that the deepest layer of his thoughts was a callousness akin to an iceberg at the bottom of the sea. Mending the pen after the sheep is lost is not a flock of sheep but a fence. Its purpose is none other than order. As Wang spoke, the scene under the projection of the scales of truth quickly changed. It swept over a dense crowd. These people were scattered across the 3 connected buildings. Because of the sudden darkness, they were bewildered and uneasy. However, as time passed, human instincts to adapt to the environment came into play. The convenient and efficient information system of modern society was also the embodiment of rules and order. As the government sent targeted information to all the trapped citizens and instructed them to evacuate, the panic of the people gradually subsided. Tens of thousands of citizens were evacuated from the fire escape and emergency evacuation exits. In modern metropolises, high-rise commercial buildings were often connected by high-altitude stairs and conveyor belts. They were like long vines that extended and entangled in a primeval forest. This also made it convenient for evacuation during emergencies. At this time, people were flowing out of these tunnels like ants. Due to the proper distribution of information, the overall situation was quite stable. However, this also caused the imbalance of the scales of truth to become more serious. Seeing the white scales move down again, not to mention Xianxia, even Qingli, who hadn't been very focused all this time, couldn't help but divert some of his attention. If the imbalance couldn't be transformed into a balanced state, it meant that the spellcasting had failed. The 3 of them would suffer a serious backlash. This was much more tragic than the one caused by the secretary earlier. One order, one world. And Wang sighed softly. I like order. Order is the brightest path to the truth. But sometimes we must abandon the low-level parts and replace them with the high-level parts. To use the low-level world as a ladder to the high-level world. And Wang. Xianxia felt that something was wrong. And Wang's request to cut off the power to the 3 buildings was very inappropriate. And according to what Wang had just said, wasn't it a step further? Step further? What step was it? And Wang's response was clear. Before order there must be disorder. New birth must be accompanied by destruction. Before the thought was extinguished, a dazzling radiance exploded within Frost River reality. The shockwave instantly flattened the glass wall on one side. 7 or 8 human silhouettes scattered amidst the flying shards of glass that filled the sky. They were thrown towards the 3 connected buildings. Chapter 237. And Wang. Zhang Zhao's thoughts trembled. His emotions were panicked. He wanted to yell at Wang, "We've completely crossed the line." Everything that had happened before could be explained by the fact that they had no regard for the civilians during the fierce battle with Fairchild. They could even make a countercharge by saying that the enemy's choice of battlefield was unprofessional. This was a common occurrence. But if they stubbornly insisted on doing things their own way, directly tearing apart the bottom line of the government's social governance, they would blindly terrorize and expand. How would they be any different from the vagrant organizations in the wilderness? If they truly angered the Star Alliance Committee or even the local powers, many parties would unite to denounce them. Even the First Ablatum Assembly would find it difficult to absolve them. And Wang. And Qingli was also panicking. His thoughts were similar to Zhang Zhao's, but he was even more advanced. Once the matter was investigated, and Wang was old and experienced. He did not care about anything. The Ablatum Knights only needed to carry out the mission. Those gunmen might not even be able to keep their lives. In the end, only he and Xianxia would be left to bear the blame. And with his previous terrible performance, it was very likely that he would suffer even more losses. No matter how uncomfortable Xianxia and Qingli felt, the situation would not return to zero. As gunfire wildly pulsed in the darkness, the truly terrifying Ablatum Knights frantically accelerated atop the triangular spaceship. They leaped into the air, their targets the 3 surrounding buildings. The intense light exploded behind them. The chaotic red and blue lights of the police lights interweaved together, foretelling the chaotic scene that was to follow. This was not a diversion, nor was it an expansion of the battlefield. It was purely a destruction. It was very likely that it would be an unbridled destruction. Baze. And Qingli believed that he still had a bit of friendship with Baze. He could not help but contact the other side. He wanted to understand just what sort of arrangements Wang had made. He knew that this was meaningless, but if he did not understand this, he would simply suffocate. However, Baze did not respond. When Qingli tried to continue calling out, his scalp tightened. It was as if his consciousness had suddenly fallen into a layer of ice. He could not send out any thoughts. Baze is currently much busier than you. Why don't you do something more meaningful? For example, maintain silence? And Wang's thoughts flowed within the evolution field. He became the master of everything. And Qingli could only shrink into a corner like a decorative pillar. The exchange of thoughts only lasted for a short moment. At this time, the jumping gunfire inside the building was still imprinted in many people's pupils. But then the trajectory of bullets from other directions tore through the night sky, penetrated the glass curtain wall, and blasted the figure holding the gun into pieces. Even earlier than that, the gunshots from Block B were only echoes. The evolution field faithfully transmitted these changes back, forming an image. Secretary. And Qingli saw the enemy he had just made. In addition, in Building A and Building C, snipers from either the military or the police had instantly killed the gunmen, as well as sniper robots that had infiltrated the building at some point in time. No one could pull the trigger a second time. Those brainwashed gunmen were originally abandoned pawns, so it was normal for them to die. However, the loss of these few lives proved a very bad fact. The government, the military, and the association were working together. Perhaps the military's assault team or even the Deep Blue Walkers were already on their way in a place where they couldn't see. And Wang, things have gotten out of hand. And Qingli couldn't help but roar. But at this time his body suddenly quivered. The rapidly increasing chaos element caused the projection of the scales of truth to lean more and more toward a balanced state. It instantly crossed an important node, causing the power of the holy artifact to begin to be projected toward the three spellcasters. The function of the evolution field had advanced. The thoughts of the three first ablatums converged in a certain sense. And Qingli still did not have any authority, but at least he had become more sensitive. He could sense that the Krite was attempting to absorb even more chaos element on the black plate. That thing was indeed growing. However, there was interference. There seemed to be an invisible sieve under the night sky. Someone was attempting to gather this chaotic region, or at least bestow a unique order upon this region. The image within the evolution field continuously switched, sweeping over all the members of the society. This included the secretary that Qingli paid special attention to, as well as Luonan, who was about to land. Qingli noticed that the teenager was currently looking up at the sky. His expression of astonishment was extremely obvious. He should have been startled by the intense changes. The problem was that his gaze was not directed at the ceiling of Frost River reality where the Ablatum Knights were soaring. Instead, it was directed at a higher altitude. It's him. It's that kid. And Qingli blurted out. Actually, he did not know whether or not Luonan was the problem. However, the thought of using someone else to do his dirty work was enough for him to express this sort of judgment. And Wang did not respond. Then the image switched, proving that he did not care about Qingli's judgment at all. The image was focused on the sky above Frost River reality. This enormous triangular spaceship had become a tattered biscuit that had its insides hollowed out due to the collision between Baze and Fairchild. The 7 Ablatum Knights had already leaped away from this place. Their speeds were fast and they had already collided with the outer glass curtain wall of the building. The ceiling was completely empty. There was nothing there. But soon the integrated image of information inexplicably shook for a moment. Wondrous ripples even blossomed in the evolution field at that location. It was not an illusion. And Qingli's eyelids twitched. Slight distortions appeared on the magical array constructed from high-energy light beams around his body. Correspondingly, the flow of energy that was originally as smooth as water formed a vortex out of thin air. It was just that the operation of the magical array had nearly entered a fork in the road. While Qingli was distracted, the image displayed by the evolution field switched once more. It pointed at the first of the Ablatum Knights to charge up the building. Qingli remembered that this fellow was Flying Shark. His speed underwater and in the air was first-rate among this group of people. The force of his charge was very strong, and his killing intent was extremely heavy. There was a boom as the enormous glass curtain wall was smashed into pieces by Flying Shark. That fellow must have locked onto the direction before he exerted his strength. There were 20 to 30 citizens who did not have the time to evacuate behind this piece of glass. Flying Shark's extraordinary power was poured into every piece of glass shard that flew everywhere. The fate of those unlucky bastards was probably the same as being shot by a shotgun. The first wave. And Qingli could already foresee the scene of blood flowing like a river. However, what appeared in the evolution field next was not flying flesh and blood. It was not miserable wails. It was just streaks of distorted flowing light. Then there was nothingness. Where is he? And Qingli's thoughts froze for a moment. After a moment, the glass curtain wall shattered one after another. The Ablatum Knights landed on the building one after another. However, they were faced with an incomprehensible emptiness. There was not a single shadow within the entire building as far as the eye could see. The Krite materialized in the projection of the scales of truth stiffened. Soon after, it melted into the smoke of the plate. The black plate rose up all the way to the top. Correspondingly, the white plate on the other side heavily pressed down. Chapter 238. Luo Nan and the others had just stepped onto the side road of Fudong Main Street when the shockwave enveloped the area around Frost River reality. Just as Zhang Yingying had expected, there were no gunmen on the lower floors. The journey down was easy and pleasant, and it took them less than 100 seconds. They even had the time to think about it a little more. With the shadow of the building, they could quietly descend so as not to be too shocking. However, the actions of the Ablatum Knights above Frost River reality made their cautiousness a joke. Just what is he doing? When Zhang Yingying saw the shockwave that exploded within Frost River reality and the figure that flew out, her usually jumpy train of thought was somewhat unable to hold on. There was nothing strange about a few gunmen dying right after they opened fire and getting rid of them cleanly. Compared to the few Ablatum Knights, they were not even worth a fart. If I had known that this would be the result, I wouldn't have been so hesitant. I would have just taken action. That's for sure, and Weng's brain has already atrophied, hiss. Zhang Yingying suddenly covered her ears and frowned. Half of Luo Nan's brain was stupefied a bit earlier than her. This was probably the most intense tinnitus he had ever felt in his entire life. It rang loudly, making him suspect that someone had fired a gun right next to his ear. He also covered his ears and couldn't help but grimace. What happened? Xue Lei was originally immersed in the successful high-altitude rapid descent experience, but he was given a fright by Luo Nan's desperate reaction. Bai Xinyan glanced at the two of them, then lowered her head to look at her wristband. He then shrugged. There's a problem with the encrypted channel. On the screen of her wristband, the countdown stopped at 97 seconds. It's the collapse of the psychic wave network. Zhang Yingying recovered from the initial shock and patted her ear lightly. She had a strange look on her face. I haven't had this symptom for a long time. Is the president doing some extreme experiments again? This is the mission process. Halfway through her sentence, she suddenly stopped talking. At this time, Bai Xinyan cast her gaze toward the end of the auxiliary road. Xue Lei was a bit hesitant. He raised his head to look with uncertainty. In the end, Luo Nan recovered from his tinnitus state with great difficulty. He blurted out the most crucial words. Where is he? In this instant, the brilliant river of stars that Luo Nan used clairvoyance to illuminate was silently extinguished, leaving behind nothing but emptiness. There were only a few dozen stars left, as well as the nebula dust that was even harder to see. Such a strong contrast caused Luo Nan to be stupefied in place. At this time, Zhang Yingying grabbed his arm to make sure that the two of them were a little closer. Then she looked at Bai Xinyan and the few of them carefully walked out of the side road. At this time, the night rain had not stopped. The police lights were on, the street lights were on, and the public transport vehicles were also on. Only the buildings behind them were pitch black. The contrast between light and darkness was strong. However, regardless of whether it was in the light or in the dark, there was not a single person within their line of sight. The entire street, the entire building complex, and even the blurry city under the curtain of rain were all empty and devoid of life. If there were strong people, they would be the Ablatum Knights who had just shattered the glass curtain wall. There was also Frost River reality, where Fairchild and Baze had suddenly engaged in a direct and violent confrontation. There was also the first Ablatum and his subordinates within the three dark clouds at the top of the building. These people took the form of constellations, nebula dust, and appeared on the plane of Luo Nan's mental clairvoyance. Compared to the vast and resplendent star river from before, the sparseness was shocking. Oh, I made a mistake. An inexplicable voice penetrated into Luo Nan's mind, and then the background noise suddenly became rich. A ripple seemed to streak past Luo Nan's eyes. He let out a cry and his entire body seemed to be electrified. His vision blurred, and the dense starlight and the gloomy void transformed back and forth several times. Only then did it stabilize and return to its normal state of the brilliant star river. However, there were some subtle differences. On the plane of reality, a dense mass of people appeared out of thin air. They rubbed shoulders with one another as they hurried past, submerging the small team of 4. Most of the people were far away from this area. They occasionally turned their heads to look at the pitch-black building, revealing expressions of confusion and suspicion. This was the scene that should have happened in reality. But what was that just now? Hey, did you see that? Those Ablatum Knights. They're gone. Zhang Yingying's voice suddenly lowered. It was a bit hoarse. There's also Fairchild and Baze. Bai Xinyan cast her gaze toward Frost River reality. There, the impact of the battle had strangely disappeared without a trace. All that was left was the broken outer wall of the building. Luo Nan added in his mind, and the 3 first ablatums on the top of the building. They're on the other side. Bai Xinyan muttered to herself for a few seconds before speaking softly. It's like a legendary technique like spatial fault. They can intercept a segment of spacetime and replicate it. Or they can use the projection of the world. I've only heard that there are some extraordinaries who flaunt themselves as gods who possess this sort of nearly inexplicable spacetime ability. Spatial fault? Zhang Yingying had heard of this for a long time, but it was mostly in the works of fantasy. She could only spread her hands. Right now, the only known extraordinary in the entire city is the president. The gazes of the 2 beauties, each with their own characteristics, locked. Zhang Yingying subconsciously reached out to touch her ear. The encrypted channel had yet to be restored, and the chaos of the psychic wave network continued. However, as long as one wanted to understand the situation, one could still use the primitive method of using a wristband. Zhang Yingying began to make calls. She wanted to find someone to clarify things. Fault. Luo Nan, who was next to her, naturally heard the conversation between the 2 women. He blinked and his consciousness flowed, permeating through the void. The brilliant star river of his clairvoyance was still the same as before. There seemed to be nothing abnormal. However, after the experience he had just experienced, the greatest abnormality was that there was nothing abnormal. Due to the appearance of the spatial fault, the Ablatum Knights, Fairchild, the 3 first Ablatums, and the other members of the Order of Justice were all swallowed up. These people no longer existed on the plane of reality. Regardless of whether or not this was the work of that person, this change should be reflected in Luo Nan's mental senses. It was just like when he first entered the spatial fault and instantly sensed the change. However, the reality was that regardless of whether it was Fairchild's magnificent and dazzling constellation, the nebula dust of Baze and the other 8 Ablatum Knights, or the dark cloud formed by the 3 first Ablatums, all of them remained within the star atlas. There was just an additional layer of indescribable layers. The reason for this was that although Luo Nan's body had come out, his consciousness, or at least a portion of it, remained within the spatial fault. It carried out the work he was most familiar with. Observation. Luo Nan was simultaneously observing 2 worlds. They were independent of each other, yet they overlapped with each other. A brand new dimension was opened within the 3-dimensional structure of clairvoyance. It was a feeling that defied all human experience. It could only be sensed, but it could not be described. It was extremely bizarre yet brilliant beyond compare. This was especially true when the 2 worlds, which appeared to be completely identical, overlapped with each other in reality. This gave Luo Nan an additional angle of observation. The dark cloud of dust, which was originally chaotic and unclear, became much clearer. Even though it was still difficult to refine a life sketch in the form of a constellation, it was still possible to draw an outline that was not too different from each other. It was more distinguishable from each other. And so, the dark cloud that affected observation gradually thinned and split apart, revealing the true faces of the 3 first Ablatums of the Order of Justice. Soon Luo Nan found the one with the highest status. It was an old man wearing loose robes. He stood in the middle of the landing platform of Building A. His figure was thin and withered. He looked old and clumsy. Needless to say, this was Wang. Although he was trapped within the spatial fault, this old man did not show any signs of anxiety. He just smiled and sighed with emotion. Doing things that ordinary people are unable to do is called extraordinary. Yang, compared to you, I really am old and decrepit. And Wang, you praise me too much. As Wang spoke, a middle-aged man appeared on the rooftop of the building Wang was in. He wore a black suit that seemed like he was about to attend a banquet. He stood about 10 meters away from the century-old man and bowed slightly to show courtesy. Chapter 239. Ouyang. President Ouyangchen. Luonan finally understood He Yuan's meaning. No wonder she didn't consider the strong members of the order at all. So she was waiting here. He had never truly seen Ouyangchen before, but he had heard of this division president who taught ability users with the theory of internal logic, invented the hexaear and established the psychic wave network. Ouyangchen's name reverberated like thunder in his ears. Now that he saw Ouyangchen face to face, he felt that Ouyangchen's image was quite consistent with his expectations. He didn't feel unfamiliar at all. And Wang and Ouyangchen were even more familiar with each other. They had both been in Xia City for many years, keeping each other in check. The number of interactions between the two was even greater than the number of members and followers they had. This old man, who was already over 100 years old, raised his head to look at the night sky, which was no different from before. He muttered, "The logic world. I remember that you once discussed a similar concept with me. I was asking for guidance." Ouyangchen was still modest and low-key. But I refused. And Wang reminisced about the past and was rather emotional. Clergy and researchers are the same. They both yearn for the truth, but we won't place holy objects on the experimental table. We will always have a forbidden zone. Reverence or fear. In short, we must avoid it. But researchers are different. You can trample on the holy domain at any time. Ouyangchen listened quietly, not refuting. But as an extraordinaire, just by standing there, he made everyone on the landing pad, other than Wang, feel uneasy. Actually, when Wang and Ouyangchen's conversation was transmitted to the other two first ablatums through the evolution field, Xianxia and Qingli reacted as if they had swallowed a bomb. Xianxia closed his eyes and Qingli groaned. This guy came out of the laboratory. He must have crossed the line. Oh shit. And Wang laughed. Ouyang, my children don't understand you. They don't understand your work. Ouyangchen's gaze flitted across the complex light diagram around Wang's body. Just like Wang, he raised his head to look at the sky, deep in thought. He did not immediately respond. And Wang quickly withdrew his gaze. He was like an old friend, a senior, analyzing Ouyangchen's actions. You have never been an inventor. You are a theoretical researcher. You grasp a question and you will research around it until you form a valuable system. For example, when you set up the psychic wave network, others only saw the convenience, but I knew that you were researching the soul, researching mental energy, and researching the existence of the mental plane relative to the material plane. You wanted to figure out where the power that distorted reality came from. Ouyangchen looked at the old man's mottled face and replied calmly, "This is what I've been pursuing. According to your church, it is the source of the world's revolution." Oh yes, the gate of truth is open. The fact that Wang had so easily said the key words made the two first ablatums' scalps tense. Was it really this old man who had not hesitated to shed all pretense of cordiality with child and pushed for the strategy of repairing the plank road in the open and crossing the Tsong in the dark? I feel like we are all a joke. On Jing Zhao's side, Qingli once again contacted him through a private line. There's definitely something wrong with that old man's brain capacity. Or perhaps he simply doesn't take us seriously. We should think of a way. Xiao suddenly could not hear anything. This private line of communication had been inexplicably severed. At the same time, an ice-cold and penetrating intent cut through his nerves within the evolution field, slowly grinding them away. And Qingli's situation would only be worse than his. Xiao closed his eyes and then opened them again. There was no doubt that the old man had always known about this private line of communication between him and Qingli. He just turned a blind eye and let them play around. Perhaps Xiao should rejoice. Even in private communication he had never spoken ill of Wang out of caution. But at this moment he was not only worried that the old man would dig up old debts, but he was also unable to understand why Wang had suddenly expressed his attitude in such a frank manner. What was the meaning behind this? Unbeknownst to him, Xianxia's attention turned to the core of the evolution field, the projection of the scales of truth. The unbalanced state continued, but Xianxia noticed that the white plate, which had been pressed down to the bottom, had lifted a little at some unknown time. The crite that had materialized on the black plate had also begun to recover its vitality. Then where was the opposing chaotic element? Xianxia seemed to understand something in a daze, but the pressure on the mental plane had risen once again. It was ice-cold and heavy, making it impossible for his thoughts to go any deeper. The conversation between Wang and Ouyangchen was as warm as a spring breeze. No matter what, I can feel your accomplishments. Ouyang, you are attempting to redefine the laws of the material plane. Ouyangchen shook his head slightly. If such a form truly exists, I hope that it can be reproduced. But up until now, all I have been able to do is create a plausible model, a tiny instance. At the very least, this is a battlefield where I can freely move my hands and feet. It is enough to reduce the impact on the secular world. Look, Fairchild and the others are having fun fighting. While Wang was speaking, Frost River reality was finally unable to withstand the bombardment of the two powerhouses. The connection between Frost River reality and Building A broke. A large half of the structure fell down. Fairchild and Baze's figures flew up at nearly the same time, smashing into Building A's body. Immediately, an even more powerful shockwave swept out. The glass walls of over 10 floors above and below were shattered with a loud rumble. Glass flew down like rain and the entire building seemed to shake. If this was the plane of reality, the casualties of the surrounding citizens would be in the hundreds or thousands. But now there was not a single person in the building. Even if it was completely demolished, it would not matter. The only thing they had to worry about was the church members on the rooftop. The confrontation between Fairchild and Baze grew more and more intense. Although Wang had taken the initiative to bring it up, his gaze was focused on Ouyangchen for the majority of the time. He was extremely focused. Wang? It really is a very good design. Wang stared at Ouyangchen and nodded slightly. You have maintained a very high degree of independence. You are mostly borrowing the existing objects of the material plane. The consumption is not much and the pressure you endure is not great. It is hard to imagine that this is a flawed product. Ouyangchen smiled in response. So the possibility of it collapsing due to overload is very small. Wang does not need to think in this direction. Wang could not help but laugh when his thoughts were exposed in a single sentence. Ouyang, since you clearly know that this is an unsuccessful work, why don't you continue researching it? Stay in your laboratory and concentrate on it. Ignore the disturbances of society and let it proceed according to the established method. Wang, I am doing it according to the established method. Chapter 240. The rooftop was silent for a few seconds. Wang began to shake his head. Ouyang. Ouyang. Your current appearance is far from being as convincing as the results of your experiments. Ouyangchen maintained his gaze. Wang. Other than the teachings of your religion, no one can feel your sincerity. Wang's shriveled mouth opened wide. His surprisingly neat and pure white teeth cracked open into a crack. A low and hoarse laugh came from within. This is nothing. The affairs of the world are not driven by our exchanges. The decisive element is not truth or lies. It lies in the established facts. Ouyang, from the moment you established the logic world, Xia City will not operate because of our attitudes. Do you want to make a bet? Ouyangchen seriously considered it for a while. In the end, he sighed silently. I've only cut off the channel to gather chaos elements. I thought that the people at the first level of your order's first ablatums had already abandoned methods such as sacrificial sacrifice. Wang was still fine when these words were spoken, but the other two first ablatums on the rooftops of the other two skyscrapers looked as if they had been hit in the head with a stick. Xianxia was speechless. He already had a premonition, but he was just suppressing it. Now that he was clear-headed, the impact was much smaller. And Qingli was the one who had truly been hit awake. He cried out involuntarily, "What sacrificial sacrifice?" And Qingli's telepathic thoughts had already cut into the evolution field before his voice faded away. He had never been an idiot. It was just that the consecutive setbacks in a short period of time had caused his mind to not be clear. He received Ouyang Chen's reminder and looked at the changes in the projection of the scales of truth. The crucial point that he had overlooked before finally appeared clearly. We are in a spatial fault. The two worlds are separated. There are no more panicking citizens. Where does the element of chaos come from? How could he have forgotten such a simple logic? And Qingli's gaze swept over his bewildered subordinates. He then looked at the diagram of light outside his body. Cold sweat poured down in Qingli's body. He wanted to reach out, but he discovered that he was still under An Weng's punitive restraint. He could not even move a finger. But at the same time, the power contained within his body was tightly combined with the diagram of light outside his body. Layer by layer, it was extracted and flowed into the evolution field. Since he was casting a spell, consumption was a must. In addition, Qingli had suffered a backlash earlier, so he felt rather weak. He wasn't too sensitive to the loss of strength in his body. It was also because of this that he did not realize that the amount of power he had extracted recently had already far exceeded what was required for normal spellcasting. Over half of the magic power he had accumulated over the years had unknowingly been extracted. Without a doubt, all of this power had become the weights on the scales of truth to correct that damned unbalanced state. More than half of the power had been lost, but the speed of extraction was still increasing. And Qingli couldn't help but curse, "Old man, you're crazy." As the curses rang out, light and shadow fluctuated between the three buildings. The evolution field went from formless to tangible. It appeared in the void, revealing everything. The rest of the symbols and images were nothing. Everyone's attention was focused on the giant scale in the center. The black and white plates, one above and one below, revealed the crucial imbalance in front of everyone's eyes. It could be seen that even though the current situation was still white below, black above, the trend was that the white plate was slowly rising while the black plate was slowly sinking. The difference in weight between the two sides was gradually leveling out. Of course, the price was the loss of power from Qingli, Xiao, and even An Weng. Why did you choose me? Why did you choose me? And Qingli was unwilling to accept this. The sacrifice of the spellcaster would certainly be shared by all three of them. But the current trend was that he would be the first to fall. It must be known that he was An Weng's grandnephew. He was younger and had a brighter future ahead of him. He couldn't compare to An Weng, but he should at least be a bit stronger than Xiao, right? Was it because he wasn't a good judge? Was it because he wasn't able to get rid of Luonan? As Qingli was struggling with all his might, Xiao's telepathic thoughts cut through the evolution field. An Weng, just what kind of substrate did you choose? And Qingli suddenly shuddered as if he had just woken up from a dream. Yes, who was the substrate? The substrate that had never appeared on the white plate was the one that determined the upper limit of the element of chaos. If the problem with that substrate was lower than the combined power of the three first ablatums, then Qingli could definitely save it. Just as this thought arose, the image within the evolution field switched. What appeared should be a certain place within the building. That place had just been flattened by the shockwaves of the collision. Fairchild wore a white robe that was still spotless. On the other hand, Baze, who was stronger than Fairchild, was like a runaway rhinoceros. His body was flung into the air as he charged at high speed. He smashed through the glass curtain wall and fell toward the bottom of the building. Baze would not die from the fall from this height, but it was destined that it would be very difficult for Baze to tangle with Fairchild for the time being. As for the other Ablatum knights, without Baze as a shield, charging forward was meaningless. Fairchild raised his head and looked up. The evolution field just happened to give him a close-up. This Ablatum knight clearly sensed the attention of the evolution field. His gray eyes turned to the side and pointed at the dusky void outside the building. His figure suddenly rose in the next moment. He leaped out of the window, stepped on the building, and flew straight up. It would not take him much time to reach the top of the building. Truth above. Whether it was the furious and panic-stricken Qingli or the relatively calm Xiao, the two first ablatums nearly suffocated after confirming An Weng's intentions. An uncontrollable despair engulfed their souls. It was Fairchild, the powerhouse, who was just below extraordinary. He was the target that An Weng had found. Of the three first ablatums, the strongest was An Weng. However, he was already old. No matter how powerful his mental cultivation was, his fleshly body could collapse at any time. The remaining two added together might not even be able to compare to Wang. Purely in terms of blood energy, could Tu and Wang compare to the ears of truth? Clearly, they could not. Since that was the case, if they could not gather enough chaos element, the unbalanced state of the scales of truth would truly suck them dry. When that time came, the first one to die would be Qingli. No. Qingli's mind was restless. His strength was drained even faster. He tried to call out to his subordinates. Seeing his current crazed appearance, there really were a few trusted aides who wanted to rush over to help. But halfway there, Wang sighed. He extended his hand from his voluminous sleeves and used his thumb and forefinger to form a triangle. His other 6 fingers crisscrossed to form a seal that corresponded to the evolution field. It doesn't matter if you're stupid. What makes you feel helpless is to expose yourself without the slightest scruple. Qingli's mouth gaped wide open. His eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. Just as his eyes were about to tear out, the evolution field's hidden defensive mechanisms silently activated. Rays of light crisscrossed over the bodies of several of Qingli's trusted aides. Dark flames rumbled and ignited. From the outside to the inside, from the inside to the outside, they burned through these people. Yet they could not die quickly. Their hands and feet danced amidst their wretched screams. They fused their terror and despair into the flames. The flames reflected in their companions' eyes and penetrated deep into their hearts. The evolution field clearly displayed this scene. The flames soared, but it was as cold as ice. The priests and knights of the order were frozen on the spot. Wang did not say it clearly, but the meaning behind his words was very clear. The 3 first ablatums added together were no match for Fairchild. But if they used an even more intense method and used even more people to burn their offerings, wouldn't that be enough? On the projection of the scales of truth, the plate was still moving at a leisurely pace. The element of chaos continued to accumulate, but should he hope that it would slow down a bit? Or should it speed up a bit? At this moment, Qingli was truly at a loss as to what to do. He followed the instincts of a first ablatum and prayed to the order's sacred object. But Wang was above him like a black cloud covering his head. All he received was an emptiness of despair. Who will save me? As long as I can live, anyone is fine. Qingli's body stiffened. His consciousness gradually froze. Only a tiny bit of will to live remained amidst the fear and despair. It was like a flickering flame that continued to struggle. The icy darkness slowly descended. The flame slowly sank, growing weaker and weaker. But when the flame squeezed into the depths of his soul and released its final rays of light and heat in despair, it reflected a strange figure that seemed familiar. Chapter 241. Wang maintained the special triangular hand seal. Dark flames burned within the triangular cavity, spreading to his palms, upper arms, and gradually covering his chest and abdomen, all the way to his head. He did not look like a piece of charcoal. Instead, he used a more economical method to extract the essence energy from his flesh and blood bit by bit. He ignited it to unleash 120% of his energy. Wang was like this. Xianxia was more or less the same. With Qingli blocking in front of him, he could maintain his calm for now. But the calmer he was, the more confused he became. For this reason, he used the evolution field to ask Wang, "Is there a need for this? Aren't we just paving the way for the order to enter Xia City on a large scale? Are we still unable to gain trust at this level? Do we really need to sacrifice the lives of a few first ablatums?" Wang's answer was elusive and hard to fathom. Qingli, this child, only has a clear mind when he is hiding behind someone else. When he spoke of the gate of truth, he asked when and where. This is correct. Only clear concrete information can be considered fundamental. However, the order lacks this right now. So, when you want to verify it? Everything you've done is actually to find this thing that might not even exist? In the end, the order has never verified it, right? Xianxia was unable to continue controlling his emotions. Anyone would find it hard to maintain their calm when they discovered that their life might be squandered on a meaningless conjecture. No, that's not right. No matter what direction it was, he cherished his life. It was just that there were no miracles without a goal. He was not willing to give up even the last bit of hope. And Weng seemed to read his mind. We aren't aimless. Remember the human-faced arachnid? Its source. That corporation that uses money to conceal its strange smell. They want to make medicine out of the human-faced arachnid? What kind of reason is that? Quantum Corporation? The Gate of Truth? Xianxia was speechless for a time. It was hard for him to connect these two elements that did not match. But Weng firmly believed in this point. His will was incomparably firm. We have already lost the initiative. Right now we must seize this opportunity back without hesitation. Only we have the qualifications to touch the gate of truth. The authority of truth is destined to be held in our hands. Xianxia suddenly understood why he was never able to increase his rank. Perhaps every single one of the 100 people standing at the top of the order was a paranoid lunatic like Weng. He was about to give up communicating, but the unwillingness in his heart made his thoughts throb. Weng. It was also at this moment that the centenarian opposite him used the most efficient method to say to him, "Pray, child. Pray that the gate of truth." Or as the Holy Bible says, under the thick clouds on the island covered in boiling magma, demons carrying chains on their backs pass through the clouds. Order wraps around disorder and disorder devours order. Perhaps we will find a corner of the clouds, and there will be a powerful demon that the Holy Bible says will cross the sky and take our place. To hell with the demons. To hell with the Holy Scripture. Holy, holy God, gate, holy gate. In holy devil. Holy evolution. Seize. Demon. In the creation God. In of it. In. And. In. And Qingli's thoughts were like a fine thread that could snap at any time. It groaned in the storm. He is more stubborn than I expected. That's good. And Weng was very satisfied with his grandnephew's reaction. On the other side, Xianxia felt a chill in his heart. He sensed something and cast his consciousness toward the center of the evolution field. Unknowingly, the two ends of the scales of truth had formed a horizontal line that was relative to the evolution field's triangular region. 3 first ablatums, 8 ablatum knights and dozens of priests and knights. Their life force was mixed with the heart of fear and the heart of madness. Together they fused into a huge amount of chaos element. Especially within Qingli's massive output, at least for the moment, it formed a precious balance with Fairchild. Xianxia opened his mouth but nothing came out. His thoughts projected the last bit of information. But we are still in the spatial fault. And Weng's response was like a placebo. Child. You must be clear. This is an opportunity. An excellent opportunity. As the old man's thoughts became clear, Xianxia suddenly felt his body and soul tremble. With the evolution field, the projection of the scales of truth and the 3 first ablatums as the fulcrum, the three-dimensional structure constructed began to tremble and warp. The intertwining effects of power were too complex. It was hard to observe, but the final wave that formed swept across the material plane of the logic world in an instant. At this moment Xianxia saw Yangchen. This theoretical number 1 person of Xia City was frowning. He cast his gaze toward the projection of the materialized scales of truth. This scene did not require Weng to relay it. All he needed to do was to scan through the spread of the wave and transmit the information back to him. Xianxia gathered even more information. For example, he roughly understood the boundary of the logic world. It was the area where the 3 high-rise buildings were connected. It had a radius of a kilometer or so. But here came the problem. If he was sealed inside, how could he talk about verification? Before he could finish his thought, the frequency of the wave led by the scales of truth could be described as such. A subtle change occurred. Correspondingly, the wave cut into the mental plane. According to the ancient records of the order, the mental plane was like a boundless ocean. It was incomparably vast and incomparably deep. A person's mental consciousness was like a fish. Some could only swim in the shallow waters, while others could swim tens of thousands of meters under the sea. Of course, this was just a metaphor. Metaphors were often miles away from reality. But no matter what, it was extremely difficult to enter the deep sea. The Cultivation ancient records of the order roughly divided the mental plane into 5 layers: shallow, intermediate, deep, abyssal, and extreme. Xianxia was the clear oath first ablatum. Even when he was in his best state, he could only sway at the edge of the intermediate zone. But now, following the rapid change in the frequency of the wave, his body and soul trembled violently. It was as if he had warped and mixed into an ugly, monstrous fish. With a sudden plunge, he entered the deep sea that he had never experienced before. He also received the feedback of a terrifying pressure. Xianxia groaned. He felt as if the muscles and bones of his entire body were severely deformed. His soul was even more warped beyond recognition. Amidst the extreme pressure and pain, a wealth of information was transmitted back to him. But he did not even have the strength to receive the vast majority of the information, let alone understand it. Perhaps Wang could. Could he really? Through the evolution field, Xianxia could faintly sense that Wang was not having a good time either. Every change in the frequency of the wave led by the holy artifact was an absolute torment to the body of the centenarian. The damage caused was irreversible. This was verification. Verification at the cost of one's life. Xianxia was not sure whether or not he had heard a sound. Chapter 242. In the end, Xianxiao's mind was still clear. The relevant concepts quickly became clear in his mind. You release number 3. He originally did not have the strength to converse with Wang, but seeing this scene his mind surged and he actually squeezed out a bit of energy. Wang did not respond. He probably did not have the time because at this moment, there was an explosion. The edge of Building A's rooftop suddenly collapsed. A dazzling light leaped up from below like a miniature sun. Fairchild stepped out from within the rippling waves of light. He walked with large strides toward the burning Wang behind the magic array. 20 meters away, Ouyangchen gently shook his head. Even this subtle movement was caught by Child. He turned his face and stared at the extraordinary who had been a spectator for a considerable amount of time with his gray eyes. Child's deep voice seemed to be able to shake the air on the rooftop. Do you still think this is a laboratory? In a sense, yes, Ouyangchen calmly admitted. This logic world is my laboratory. How unfortunate. You let someone crazier than you in. Your experiment is bound to be a mess. Fairchild's footsteps did not stop. As he spoke, he crashed into the automatic defensive circle of the evolution field. Gloomy flames burned around his body, but not a single spark could penetrate the white light surrounding his body. Of course, the priests and knights could go forward to stop him, but the people who were immersed in fear and panic could not muster the courage to do so. Fairchild arrived outside the magic array unimpeded. His movements were still crisp and efficient. He extended his hand and shattered the cocoon-shaped diagram of light into fragments that filled the sky. One of the 3 pillars of the evolution field, and it was also the most important one, had been shattered just like that. Correspondingly, the 2 first ablatums on the rooftops of Building B and Building C screamed miserably at the same time, as if they had lost control of high-voltage electricity. The diagram of light around them twisted and collapsed. Xianxia fared slightly better. He had discovered Fairchild rushing to the rooftop in time. He was mentally prepared. Although the backlash was fierce, it was not fatal. However, on the other rooftop, Qingli, who was already out of his wits, was not so lucky. Forcefully entering the depths of the mental plane was already too much for him to bear. The backlash from the collapse of the pillar of the evolution field destroyed his fleshly body in the first instant. The splattered flesh and blood turned into burning torches before they could completely disperse. The pain of his flesh being torn apart and being burned incinerated Qingli's willpower into ashes. He knelt on both knees and then collapsed onto the ground. He rolled around and let out anguished howls, each one weaker than the last. Meanwhile, in Block A, the dark flames around Wang expanded by half a meter. The intensity of the flames had multiplied many times over. His robes and his skinny body were all ablaze. The light of the fire penetrated deep into his body. Through the flames, one could even see the emptiness behind him. But Wang only stood there quietly. He maintained the triangular seal that corresponded to the evolution field. He only raised his face slightly. His eyes were still turbid amidst the flames as they met Fairchild's gray pupils. The moment their gazes met, he opened his mouth slightly and spoke in a weak voice from his already scorched throat. As long as you yearn for the truth, it will definitely be on both sides of the scale. But there is no need to be at the mercy of chaos. Child stepped forward again and punched Wang's head. The external force of the fist and the internal flames acted at the same time. The old man's head was instantly smashed into fireworks that filled the sky. Child's expression did not change in the slightest when he succeeded in one strike. This was because he knew that the target his fist had shattered did not have much meaning. His fist, which he had yet to withdraw, slightly tightened. An invisible shockwave was launched from the material plane. It charged into the mental plane and penetrated extremely deep. But in the end he was still a step too slow. Some incorporeal shadow leaped out from An Weng's burning body and concealed itself in the depths of the void. Child raised his head and his gaze pointed to the center of the triangle formed by the three buildings. It was the void directly above Frost River reality. There, the materialized projection of the scales of truth stood amidst the rolling waves of light. The evolution field had lost its pillar and could completely collapse at any moment. But the projection of the scales of truth still appeared to be stable. This was not just the miraculous effects of the holy object. It was the support of a new power. On the rooftop of Block C, Xianxia could no longer stand. He barely managed to control his body and sat on the ground. He looked down in a daze. Within the distorted and turbulent evolution field, the originally malevolent image became even uglier. Before he had only seen the occasional insect limb. Now it appeared before his eyes in a seriously distorted posture. Of course, it was no longer an insect. It was a clear demonic shadow. The slender limbs moved within the waves of light. The demonic body of man and arachnid that was one with one clung to the lower part of the projection of the scales of truth. The six-eyed demon eye flickered with light. No one knew who its attention was focused on. Number 3, Xianxia murmured. Number 3 was a human-faced arachnid. The Order of Justice was one of the first powers to clearly set out to search for and utilize the human-faced arachnid. They relied on their first move and accurate information to capture a total of 5 human-faced arachnid clones over the past 10 days. They were arranged according to numbers 1 to 5. After some research and testing, the human-faced arachnid clones devoured each other. There was also a specimen that was sent to the first sacrifice. In the end, only number 3 was left. It was kept at An Weng's place. No one knew what the old man would do. Now An Weng's head had been smashed by Fairchild's fist. Number 3, who had remained hidden all this time, had revealed itself. Furthermore, it had thrown itself into the collapsing evolution field a step earlier. Xianxia was in a state of confusion. His consciousness, which was still being pulled and controlled by the evolution field, connected with a chaotic and restless power. Human-faced arachnid number 3. Xianxia instinctively wanted to use the method of controlling the human-faced arachnid to secure the initiative. But in the next instant he came into contact with a cold and clear plane behind the chaotic power. The information in his consciousness rippled like light waves. The frequency was so familiar. At this moment, Xianxia's hair stood on end. An Weng? Number 3 did not respond. He could see that its 6 demonic eyes and its ugly head were pointing in a different direction at the same time. It was the rooftop of Building B where Qingli was. In the next moment, number 3 suddenly disappeared from the plane that could be sensed. By the time Xianxia relied on his perception ability, which had yet to be completely withdrawn from the mental plane, to lock onto number 3's position, number 3 had already crashed into the depths of the mental plane. Its target was clear. It covered the rooftop of Building B in an instant. Its sharp limbs pierced downwards. Before the attack could land, another demonic figure soared into the sky from the remains of Qingli's body, which was about to be completely burned away. It leaped into the void. Xianxia saw it clearly. It was another human-faced arachnid. The spoils of war hidden away. A consciousness suddenly came to him. It was extremely clear. Even though Xianxia was mentally prepared, he was still so startled that he nearly blurted out, "An Weng." The consciousness flashed. In the depths of the mental plane, the 2 ugly monsters collided together. Victory and defeat were practically decided in an instant. Number 3, or rather An Weng, used its nightmarish calicity to shred half of the spoils of war. Then it bit down forcefully, completely swallowing the food that was half in its mouth. In the end, it chewed off the head of the human-faced arachnid, which was indistinguishable from each other. The 2 ugly heads came together and one swallowed the other. The scene of the human-faced arachnid cannibalism had never been as nauseating as it was now. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.